In Kanyama, a town where the red earth clung to ankles and stories clung to night air, lived a woman named Ayo. She kept to herself in a crooked house of mud and reeds at the edge of the cassava fields. Children said her compound smelled like smoke and secrets. Traders swore her footsteps made raffia whisper. The women of Kanyama greeted her from a distance, clutching their wrappers tighter, as if politeness could keep misfortune at bay. Ayo owned no stall at the market, no husband in the yam lines, no child to run errands. She had a sewing needle, a charcoal brazier, and a calabash she never let anyone touch. When the harmattan began to flay the skin of January, she offered to fix torn wrappers and mended the thin fabric of men's S-shirts with stitches so small you might miss them. Her price was humble: a handful of ground nuts, a gourd of Pam wine, or, strangest of all, bring me the garments closest to your skin, the ones that hug you when the rest of the world forgets. Underwear, gasped Mama Ijoma the first time Ayo named it. Panties. She laughed with the surprise of it. Is your needle hungry for shame? Ayo only smiled. A cloth that knows your sweat knows your story. And stories fray where the world rubs hardest. She said no more. People either laughed or crossed themselves with their thumbs and fled. Yet it was true that Ayo's hands could coax obedience from stubborn thread. A girl's ripped school skirt, stitched by Ayo, never tore again. A fisherman's net patched by Ayo gathered mullet as if enchanted. And so, slowly, reluctantly, Kanyama did what hungry towns do. They risked odd bargains to soothe daily pains. First came the timid. A widow named Safia brought a bundle wrapped in a faded scarf, 2 threadbare panties, and 1 boy S undershorts. For my daughters, she whispered, eyes darting. Sewn strong, for they walk far for water. Ayo's fingers moved like rain on zinc. She took nothing in return. Leave a promise, she said, that you will share your water with the woman who knocks last. Safia agreed, puzzled but grateful. Then came the practical. Young wives who bartered undergarments for hemming and tucked the transaction under baskets so the market would not pry. Soon, even the loudest gossipers were sneaking to Ayo's door at dusk, carrying intimate cloth like contraband. But every bargain birthed suspicion. What does she do with them? Whispered the co-wives at the grinding stone, eyes on the dust. Does she sniff our luck? Tie our husbands into knots? A rumor is a spark in dry grass. It doesn't crawl, it runs. In the heart of the village, beside a stubborn baobab whose roots broke the ground like old knuckles, lived the headman's niece, Zinzi. She moved through Kanyama with a laughter that made apprentices drop nails and roosters forget to crow. Zinzi could peel a cassava and a man's pride with equal efficiency. She liked to collect enemies as if they were cowries on a string. When Zinzi lost a lover to a quieter woman, she asked around until she found a story with teeth. Ayo takes your panties, she told her friends, voice bright with poison. And she boils them with herbs and mutters so your name can be folded into knots. She weakens your knees and fattens your hips to keep your legs from running toward your own future. I heard it from a girl whose cousin's aunt swore it on her mat. Laughter, then frowns ripening into fear. Zinzi's rumor, carried by the evening wind, crossed compounds and courtyards, slid under doors, sat beside steaming pots like a silent guest. The next morning, women passed Ayo and tucked their chins into their wrappers, their eyes hard as millet. Ayo watched the tide turn and said nothing. She threaded another needle, set water to warm, and placed her calabash on the floor, tracing its rim with a thumb that trembled once and stilled. That same week, misfortunes began to gather like goats at the smell of cassava peels. A trader's bicycle chain snapped 2 days in a row. Twins came down with fever. The river, mean with the season, delivered fewer fish. Kanyama did what frightened towns do. They searched for a throat to stuff their fear into. We must ask the elders, Zinzi urged, her grief for lost love burning like dry oil. We must ask the priest of the grove. Or should we wait until our daughters' blood dries into dust because their underwear has been boiled away in sorcery? The women murmured assent the way dry corn murmurs when you pour it into a sack, soft, eager, self-convincing. At dusk, drums announced a gathering. Smoke rose in ribbons. The elders sat on carved stools. The masquerade masks stared from the rafters. The priest, Baba Obi, whose beard caught the moon like cobweb, heard all and nodded as if the words were beads he was weighing. When he called for Ayo, she came barefoot, the reddish dust blessing her ankles, a thin shawl tied tight against the wind. "Daughter," Baba Obi said, "the town says you have woven yourself into their secret places." Ayo looked at the people who had once thanked her for saved skirts and mended hope. She looked at Zinzi, whose eyebrows were 2 spears held high. "I have only sewn what was already torn," she said softly. "And the calabash?" Zinzi pounced. "What sleeps inside it?" Ayo's eyes flicked toward the gourd, as if it were a child she had hidden too long. She lifted it with both hands and set it carefully on the ground. "I cannot show you here," she said, "but I can show you under the tree that has witnessed more secrets than all of us." The baobab waited, listening with the patience of the very old. They walked in a hush that chewed its own tongue. At the tree's root, Ayo knelt. "Take off your pride," she told Zinzi quietly, "and bring me one thing you are sure belongs to you." Zinzi's laugh was a brittle thing. She produced a snow-white panty from a hidden pocket, scandalously clean, never worn, a woman's ceremony to herself. "Watch," Ayo said. She lit a candle against the wind, its flame a stubborn eye. She poured water into a clay basin and added leaves, neem for cleansing, lemongrass for courage, bitter leaf for truth. Then Ayo opened her calabash. Inside lay not bones, nor knots, nor beads of other people's luck. There lay a mound of charcoal ink and strips of old cloth inscribed with names, prayers written in the crooked hand of those who had leaned against her door and whispered their small burdens into her silence. "Let my child live. Let my husband stop drinking the wages. Let my shop have customers who come with coins and leave with laughter." "These," Ayo said, "are the names of your fears. You thought you dropped off your panties. What you gave me was trust." Zinzi rolled her eyes. "Trust is not thread." "No," Ayo agreed, "but it frays." She dipped Zinzi's white panty in the water and began to scrub, not as a washerwoman scours dirt, but as a priest tends a body. As she worked, she spoke, not incantations, but truths stitched together like a hymn. "Zinzi, daughter of Chileshe, your laughter is a drum, but you beat it to drown your own heartbeat. You collect enemies because you are afraid of the day no one looks your way. You lost a lover, not your future. The cloth that hugs you when the world forgets is the cloth that knows how you stand up after sorrow." Zinzi's mouth went hard, then soft. The women leaned forward, their suspicion trailing like loose thread. Ayo rinsed the white garment, wrung it gently, and hung it on a low branch. Then she took out one of the inscribed strips of cloth. "Safia's promise," she said. She burned it to ash. The ash fell into the water, made it cloud, then settle, then clear again. Baba Obi's voice came like a footstep on sand. "What do you do with them? With the panties?" "I launder them," Ayo said, simple as rain. "And while I launder, I listen. Cloth talks. It says, this one walks too far on empty. It says, this one clenches her stomach so her children can eat. It says, this one is always braced for a blow. I wash away what does not belong. Shame that was never yours. Fear that never fit. Salt from tears you've already paid. Then," she smiled, "I stitch a secret pocket into the lining." The women blinked. "A pocket?" Someone echoed, half incredulous, half child, as though the word itself might hold a sweet. Ayo nodded and turned the panty inside out, tracing a seam with her finger. "In each pocket I tuck the smallest scrap of cloth with a word I write by moon. Stand, return, refuse, remember. A woman must carry a word where only she can keep it. It is not a spell, it is a reminder." She held up her inky fingers. "This is my only magic," silence pooled. The baobab shifted its great shoulders. Somewhere, a nightjar stitched the darkness with sound. Zinzi's voice was quieter. "And the herbs?" "Courage has a scent," Ayo said. "I want it to follow you even when you forget your own name." She lifted the basin. The water shimmered with a faint silver, reflecting faces that had come to accuse and now found themselves reflected soft as dawn. "The misfortunes," one of the elders ventured. "Why have they come?" Baba Obi sighed. "Because fear invites them to sit," he murmured. When you turn your suspicion into a blade and aim it at your neighbor, you notch a space in your door through which trouble enters, grinning. He turned to the women. "Who here has kept back her coins from Sophia's water? Who here sneered at the girl with cheap sandals? Who here made a rumor and called it caution?" One by one, hands rose, trembling as if lifted by strings of honesty. Even Zinzi's hand floated up like a reluctant kite. The night seemed to breathe again. Ayo stood, her shadow tall against the trunk. "If you still wish to hate me, do it in the daylight," she said. "But if you have garments that bite your waist or whisper you are not enough, come tomorrow. I will mend what I can. Leave groundnuts if you must leave something. Leave a promise if you can leave nothing." The crowd dispersed in twos and threes, their talk softer, their eyes not so sharp. Zinzi lingered. "You spoke my name as if you were washing it," she said, not quite smiling. "How much for your water?" "For you," Ayo said with a tilt of her head. "Bring me a rumor and drown it in this basin. That will be enough." The next morning, Kanyama arrived not with stones, but with laundry. Ayo's yard became a shy parade of intimate cloth, fluttering like surrender flags in a steady breeze. She soaked, scrubbed, stitched, tucked small words where shame had once nested. She taught girls to thread needles with patience and boys to wash without sneer. She showed Sophia's daughters how to reinforce seams. She made Zinzi write her own word, enough, and stitch it into her garment until her laughter softened into music without edges. News of Ayo's work traveled along the footpaths like good scent. Women came from neighboring villages, hawkers with baskets of oranges and blistered feet, grandmothers whose memories were crowded rooms, girls whose bodies had bloomed overnight and did not know how to carry themselves. Each left with a garment that did not pinch, a word secreted where the world could not pluck it, and a little less room inside for fear to sit. Men watched, puzzled at first, then curious. A fisherman named Musa arrived, scratching his head. "I do not wear panties," he announced, in case anyone suspected otherwise. "But if you can stitch faith into net, perhaps you can stitch patience into a man's undershorts." Ayo laughed, the sound like water poured from clay. "Patience comes from breath, not cloth," she said. But she fixed his waistband and tucked a word all the same. "Listen." Weeks later, Musa returned with more fish than curse words, and a softness around his eyes where hardness had lived. Not everyone unlearned suspicion. There were those who preferred the taste of fear, bitter and certain. But fear began to find fewer mouths to live in. Even misfortune, starved of attention, drifted away like smoke that forgets why it lingered. One afternoon, as the sky stacked blue upon blue, Zinzi came running, skirts flaring like small wings. "Ayo, come quickly." She dragged her to the river, where Sophia's youngest had slipped from a rock and gone under. The bank was wild with voices, hands, panic. Ayo pushed through, eyes searching. She saw a flash, cloth pale as breath, caught on a submerged branch. She plunged without thinking, the river grabbing her waist. The current tugged like a greedy child, but she found the girl, heavy as fear, and kicked until the world coughed her back onto the bank. The child sputtered, cried, then clung to Ayo as if she were a raft carved from mercy. When the crying quieted, Ayo turned the girl's dress inside out. There, stitched clumsily but firm, a pocket. Inside, a damp scrap, the ink running but legible. Float. Safia pressed her forehead to Ayo's feet. "I will share my water with the woman who knocks last," she said, remembering. Promises, like seams, hold when you honor them. That night, Kanyama lit fires that were not for fear, but for story. Baba Obi poured palm wine and told the tale anew, how the town mistook a bomb for a blade. How a woman laundered shame from cloth and courage into hearts. How we looked into a calabash expecting darkness, and found instead our own small prayers, folded and kept safe. Zinzi spoke next, her voice steadier than her gossip had ever been. "I thought if I named a witch, I would not have to name my hurt," she confessed. "But hurt is a stubborn goat. It comes home at dusk whether you insult your neighbor or not." The women laughed, this time the kind of laughter that made room. Ayo sat near the edge of the light, mending a hem that had nothing wrong with it, just as a way to keep her hands busy while her heart, unused to the warmth of belonging, learned to stretch. The children crept closer to her shadow, no longer afraid. In the weeks that followed, Ayo's calabash filled and emptied like a tide. More names, more prayers. Words tucked away where only the wearer could reach. Some asked for harder things. Justice, a child, the untwisting of a man's hands. Ayo said, "Cloth cannot change a man, but a word might change the way you stand before him." She taught them how to reinforce not just seams, but boundaries. When the rains finally broke and thunder washed the dust from the leaves, the town blessed the water. Ayo stood at the river with them, her hands rinsed of ink for the first time in months. Zinzi pressed a new calabash into her palms, carved with a pattern that looked like waves learning to be gentle. "For the prayers yet to come," she said. People still whispered about Ayo because villages will always whisper. But the whisper had changed its flavor. It sounded like relief, like respect, like recognition of something that had been among them all along. Women's work, invisible until the world tears and only a needle can hold it together. And if strangers passed through Kanyama, drawn by the rumor of a woman who did strange things with underwear, they found no witchcraft fire, no bubbling pot of malice. They found lines of clean, fluttering intimates, clouds of herbal scent, and a woman with ink-stained fingers teaching a shy girl to stitch a pocket where a word might live. Once, a traveler asked her bluntly, "Is this not superstition? Words in cloth?" Ayo smiled. "Superstition is what people call other people's hope. Mine fits in a seam so the world cannot tug it loose." She held up a panty, the pocket a small square of possibility. "If only you knew what women carry here," she said softly. "Not charms, not tricks, just names for their courage." That night, when the lamps were embers and the crickets were stubborn, Ayo sat alone and finally took from her calabash a strip of cloth with her own name written crookedly. Ayo, daughter of nobody, maker of small miracles. She tucked it into her own garment, laughing at herself, tender as a woman braiding her hair in the dark. The next day, a girl came to her with a tear in her skirt and a tremor in her voice. "People will talk," the girl said, eyes on her toes. "They will," Ayo agreed, threading her needle. "Give them a better story to carry." She pointed to the stool by the doorway. "Sit, tell me where it hurts," the needle whispered. The river answered. The baobab listened, and Kanyama learned to hold itself together, not with fear and rumor, but with seams and words, stitched where only the wearer could feel them. Strong where the world rubs hardest, so when people ask, if only they knew what she does with their underwear. The women of Kanyama shrug and smile. "She washes them," they say. "She stitches pockets. She tucks away words that keep our backs straight and our hearts stubborn. She does with our underwear what the world forgets to do with our lives. She makes them fit us again. And if you listen closely, you can hear the final moral in Baba Obi's voice, drifting through cooking smoke and evening prayer. Beware the rumor that flatters your fear. Trust the hands that mend more than cloth. And when you can, carry your own word where only you can reach it. If only you knew, now you do."